best way I can describe us is that African Americans are our siblings on our mama's side that we grew up with, and Latinos are our siblings on our dad's side. Hola mes amis, je suis moi, Creole Americanization, and welcome back to my channel. And if you are new, bienvenue. So for today, I have $1 million question for you guys, and that is, are Louisiana Creoles African American or Latino? And I can already hear y'all now. I already know. Since when y'all supposed to be Latino? Let's take a look. So before we can even begin to answer the question, let's briefly go over what a Louisiana Creole even is, because you guys are often so wrong about what you think we are. So let's go over that. So Louisiana Creoles are the descendants of the original inhabitants of colonial Louisiana, emphasis on colonial Louisiana. So these were the people who were native to colonial Louisiana when Louisiana was a totally separate country. It was not America at all. This is back when it was a French or Spanish colony. Mind you, it was mainly a French colony, but for a brief moment in time, it was a Spanish colony. But yes, so our ancestors were the inhabitants of that old French or Spanish Louisiana prior to American acquisition. The average Louisiana Creole is of sub-Saharan African and or Latin European descent. Southern Europe or France, sometimes France is described as Southern Europe, sometimes not, but France on down, Latin Europe. We can also have a splash of Native American, Middle Eastern, Basque, and whatever else. But contrary to popular belief, not all Louisiana Creoles are mixed, but even our monoracial Black Creoles tend to generally have even the smallest bit of Latin European ancestry. Even if it's only 3% French or 2% Spanish, they will still have typically small traces of that same Latin European ancestry. And you have the anomaly, the occasional anomaly that has none, but for the most part, we do. Likewise, white Creoles and Cajuns are also of predominantly Latin European ancestry. Again, the French, the Spanish, maybe a little Italian, that's Latin European. And sometimes they'll even have the occasional little bit of Native American or even West African. And contrary to Anglo-white Americans, who tend to be 100% or nearly 100% European, typically Northwestern European. But in today's modern world, generally the people that identify as Creole are going to be Black or mixed with Black, though originally everyone, regardless of race, was Creole, because Creole was essentially another word for Louisianian, because Louisiana was its own colony and this was its people. It operated pretty much like a nationality would. We may be different races, different mixes or non-mixes, but we all fall under this culture and this nationality, a Latin culture, because France was a part of the Roman Empire. France is a Latin nation. So France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, these are Latin nations. So we were a Latin society, just like the rest of Latin America that was owned by the Spanish or the Portuguese. Spanish, Portuguese, French colonies, these were all Latin American colonies back in the day. The colony of Louisiana was extremely multicultural. It did not have a binary racial system the way that America did. The term Creole operated the exact same way that the term Latino operates today. Louisiana Creoles and Cajuns spoke Louisiana French or Louisiana Creole, which are both Latin dialects. And like most other Latin groups, Creoles were Catholic. So originally, Creoles were 100% Latin. They were not American, they were not Anglo-Saxon, they did not speak English. Had we continued down that path until now, today we would be regarded as French-speaking Latinos. But this was not the case. Louisiana was eventually purchased by America, and as a result, forced Americanization occurred. Many Creoles and Cajuns have grand or great-grandparents who told us stories about how they had the French language beaten out of them in school and how they weren't allowed to speak it in public, and how a lot of the parents started to not even want their children to speak French or Creole because they wanted them to have a better chance at life and they wanted them to sound more educated by speaking English. I have great-grandparents who spoke both French and Creole, and great great grandparents who spoke no English at all. Our multicultural and ethnocentric identity under French and briefly Spanish rule was exchanged for a binary one drop racial system enforced by Anglo Saxon white America, where anyone with even the smallest drop of African blood was simply regarded as black, with no regard for cultural differences such as language, religion, traditions. None of it mattered. Much like what they did to the slaves in Africa, who came from various beautiful and distinct ethnic tribes, none of it mattered to them because all they saw were black faces. These were not humans to them with beautiful human distinction and identity. They simply saw black faces. Disregard for one's culture is disregard for their humanity, and it minimizes them to something as shallow as skin color. Or in the case of racially ambiguous or passe blanc Creoles, not even their own skin color, but that of some of their distant relatives. This new binary racial system encouraged white Creoles to drop the ethnic Creole label altogether and to just identify racially as white so as to not be confused for having any trace amount of African ancestry. Because if they're saying they're Creole, mixed people are saying they're Creole, they don't want to be confused for one of those mixed people who have African blood. And Black Creoles also kind of more so easily fell into the Black identity, which would, of course, eventually evolve into the African American identity. For the sake of community and numbers, they needed to band together with the Anglo American Black people and just for that sense of community. Real quick, I just wanted to come back and acknowledge the fact that Black Creoles were not always welcomed by mixed Creoles, at least in New Orleans. I don't know what was going on in those other outskirt areas, but I know in New Orleans, they were not typically seen as or welcome to partake in the Creole identity. So it's not that they all just wanted to leave it necessarily. I'm sure lots of them did find comfort in the African American identity with those who looked like them, but there were others. Fats Domino, I know, is one who, complained about people telling him he's not Creole, he's black, he can't be Creole. So a lot of Black Creoles also hurtfully had their culture snatched from them by other mixed Creoles who did not think they fit the bill to be Creole. So I didn't want to, just not address that because I know a lot of people, when they complain about what's done to their people, they never say their side of it. They never point out where they were wrong or what they did to anyone else. So I did just want to at least acknowledge that. Whereas it was the mixed race Creoles who held onto the Creole identity for the longest. And that is because before this time, they were their own mulatto race or simply Creole. They had never seen themselves as monoracially black nor white. They have never had to have a white nor black identity. They saw themselves and were seen as by society their own racial group. Mulatto, mind you, back in the day, all the way up until 1920 something or 1930, was its own racial category. So these mixed race Creoles had been living in their French, Latin community as their own race of people, much like Latinos today who do see mixed people as their own category. So back then, these mixed Creoles were their own thing. So they were not so apt to, becoming Americanized and having to, be black or white. A lot of them, they resisted that for quite a while because they did not see themselves as black nor white. And that's not to say that there were no monoracial Creoles who didn't also still, continue to identify as Creole. But I just know that the mixed ones, it was definitely a lot of them who held on to it for longer, especially when we're talking in New Orleans. There were not very many black people claiming Creole after, a while. And to me, this is the reason that there is any semblance of a Creole identity even left today. A bunch of mixed race people needing an identity that was never afforded to mixed race people in the Anglo-Saxon American society, especially back then. It's also probably the reason many people associate Creole with meaning mixed race in the first place, because we did hold on to that title for a very long time. And so odds are, after a certain period, if you were seeing someone saying, hey, I'm Creole, or identifying as Creole, odds were it was going to be a mixed race person who felt more comfortably identifying ethnically rather than racially, much like Latinos do. They identify ethnically or they identify by their nationality because that is just much simpler for people who are very mixed race and who do not see themselves who do not share that many experiences with monoracial people. And that's just the honest truth of that. But although we did hold on to that identity for a long time, this still doesn't change the fact that originally Creole did encompass everyone from the colony of Louisiana, no matter their race, or should I say, originally, even before then, Creole actually only belonged to Europeans. Creole was a term that described people who were 100% European and they were born in the Americas in a French or Spanish or Portuguese colony, and their parents came from Europe, Spain, France, wherever they came from, but they themselves were born in America or the Americas. So that distinguished a person who was 100% European who was born in the Americas versus one who came from Europe, because the ones who came from Europe were seen as just a little bit better. I mean, they were all still white, so they were all at the top of the food chain, but a European-born white person was seen as a little bit better than the ones born in the colonies. So that's what Creole originally meant. And then, the term just evolved over time. Eventually it evolved to include everyone, at least in Louisiana, because there's Creoles all around the world, and the definition is a little different. Usually in these other countries, it does mean mixed race. All the ones I can think of, Creole people in other countries are always mixed. Creole languages are always a mixture of languages. Louisiana is the one where they, kind of make a difference. And so it evolved to mean anyone who was of the Louisiana colony. That's when it was used as sort of a nationality. And then today you have it to where we are the descendants of those born in the Louisiana colony. And there is a connotation of it meaning mixed race, probably because it gets confused with all the other Creoles from all the other countries where it does mean mixed race. But it doesn't always mean mixed race when we're speaking of Louisiana Creoles in particular. But I said all that to say, yes, Creoles are American, and yes, Creoles are Latin. We are originally, ethnically, and culturally Latin, but our nationality and largest modern cultural influence is American. And because most Creoles are people who are either Black or mixed with Black, that American influence is generally African American. But the Creole identity is very fluid and customizable, so we get to choose just how American or Latin we are based on a number of factors. So no, sadly, most of us don't speak French or Creole anymore, but we could learn if we wanted to. We have a ready-made Latinized culture of our very own, languages and all, and they all exist outside of an American lens that we could easily tap into if we wanted to. Not everybody can say that they have a whole other culture. A lot of people like to say your culture is dead. Y'all don't speak those languages no more. Y'all ain't no different from anybody else anymore. Well, it's there if we wanted to. We could learn it. Lots of us are learning it, learning Creole, learning French. It's there for us to learn, tap into, and raise from the dead if we so please. And many Creoles today are also African American, as eventually, because of Americanization, many Creoles and African Americans started to intermingle a lot. So most of the Creoles that you see today aren't exactly just Creole. They are both Creole and African American. A lot of them will have one Creole parent or even just one Creole grandparent. So it's easy to understand why, a lot of them will more so identify with the broader African American community, especially for the ones who only have one Creole grandparent, or if it's their mother who's African American. Not always, but that's often the case. And this is where we tend to see a lot of the Creole and African American overlap that lends to the misconception that Creole is merely a subcategory of African American. Because the original Black and mixed Creoles are not the descendants of African Americans. Therefore, we cannot be a subcategory of something we did not come from. The original Black and mixed Creoles were descended from Africans and whatever else they were mixed with. But our ancestors were Africans, the same way that African Americans also descend from Africans. So this makes us sister communities, not parent-child communities, because we both come from the same African source. So this means we are siblings, we are related. We are not parent and child, because neither of us is the offspring of the other. So Well, I wouldn't necessarily call a Creole Latino either because of the connotation of what Latino has come to mean in America and the fact that we have been so far removed from our Latinidad for so long, and we do not have those same strong cultural and linguistic connections to it the way that Latinos do. I wouldn't be able to call us Latino comfortably without feeling like I'm stepping on toes, but what I do refer to Creoles as is Latin. Creoles are Latin. And I know what you're thinking. Latino is just the Spanish way of saying Latin. It's the same word. Well, to that I say, over time there has become a slight nuance between the word Latino and the word Latin. When we say Latino, we tend to think of people from Latin America, generally Spanish speakers. We know Brazilians speak Portuguese, but people tend to think of Spanish speakers or maybe Brazilians, people from Latin America. But when we say Latin, we often think of like Roman Empire, the Europeans, Southern Europeans, people of Latin, Roman, spicy white people in Europe is what, when we say Latin. Even in America, we speak English. Even us, will say Latinos, Latinas when we're talking about Latin American people. And then when we're talking about like the Latin language, the Roman Empire, we'll say Latin. Majority of the time, there is sort of a distinction between the two words, even though they are the same word, just said in different languages. The whole reason that Latinos are even referred to as Latino in the first place because of their Spanish or Portuguese ancestry and their cultural blend. So this is why Creoles, like Latinos, are both Latin, as both groups derive from Latin European people and or culture, because we know that not all Latinos are mixed, not all Creoles are mixed, so some are just culturally Latin. If you're from Latin America, you're going to be culturally Latin. If you were Creole back in those days, during the French or Spanish colony of Louisiana, you were going to be culturally Latin, culturally French for the most part, because Spain didn't own us for very long. The language never switched. Everything stayed pretty French, even while we were under Spanish rule. But tomato, tomato. You would be, even if you weren't racially mixed with French or Spanish or anything, you were culturally Latin, which would be mainly Spanish or Portuguese for Latinos, and mainly French and a little bit of Spanish for Creoles. So the same way that Louisiana Creoles and African Americans are sister communities because they are both Americans of African descent, is the same way that Louisiana Creoles and Latinos are also sister communities because they are both of Latin descent and or culture, and are often the products of multiple generations of uninterrupted mixing that started in the colonial era and has continued up until today. Uninterrupted mixing. This is not the same as that where we all mix with a little something down the line. We're not talking about mixing that happened back in 1779 and has since been discontinued. We're talking about people who are the products of mixed parents, who were the products of their mixed parents, who were the products of their mixed parents, or people who have, maybe they have great-grandparents they might be monoracial, but they're all different races, something like that. It's just continuous mixing, and we're both often the product of scenarios like this. So in a nutshell, Black and mixed Louisiana Creoles are the siblings of African Americans and Latinos. And we exist within a spectrum somewhere between the two. And where we fall within that spectrum varies from person to person given various factors. Someone like me, for instance, would be more Latin leaning because I do also have Latin American Nicaraguan ancestry. My grandmother is half Nicaraguan. And for two, my phenotype, I look completely Latina. And for three, I speak Spanish. So we're all gonna vary. We all have different experiences. We all have other mixes. We all have different things about us that are gonna make us teeter or totter one way or the other. But me aside, Creoles are ethnically Latin because Creole is a Latin subculture. Creoles are generally racially Black or mulatto, and we are American in nationality. Therefore, we have proximity to both African Americans and Latinos. I see us as a bridge culture between the two, and we can identify with both groups for different reasons. The best way I can describe us is that African Americans are our siblings on our mama's side that we grew up with, and Latinos are our siblings on our dad's side that we may not have lived with or seen as often, but we look just alike and we still share a lot of common qualities because, after all, we are related. We still share those same roots and can always further connect ourselves to them now. It is never too late to build on familial connections, and Louisiana Creoles and Latinos, just like Louisiana Creoles and African Americans, are family. And that's the best way I can describe it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Gracias por ver. Like, comment, share. Talk to you guys later. Au revoir.